Hey everyone, thanks for joining us today. We've got a special intro for you today. It's by David Rovics, our guest. It's St. Patrick's Battalion. Please enjoy.
My name is John Riley. I'll have your ear only a while. I left my dear home in Ireland. It was death, starvation, or exile. When I got to America, it was my duty to go. Enter the army and slog across Texas to join in the war against Mexico. And it was there in the pueblos and hillsides that I saw the mistake I had made. Part of a conquering army with the morals of a bayonet blade. And there amidst all these poor dying Catholics, screaming children, the burning stench of it all, myself and 200 Irishmen decided to rise to the call. From Dublin City to San Diego, we witnessed freedom denied. So we formed the St. Patrick Battalion and we fought on the Mexican side. We formed the St. Patrick Battalion and we fought on the Mexican side. We marched neath the green flag of St. Patrick, emblazoned with Erin Goldbra, bright with the harp and the shamrock and Libertad per Republica. Just 50 years after Wolftown, 5,000 miles away, the Yanks called us a legion of strangers, and they can talk as they may. But from Dublin City to San Diego, we witnessed freedom denied. So we formed the St. Patrick Battalion and we fought on the Mexican side. We formed the St. Patrick Battalion and we fought on the Mexican side. We fought them in 5 major battles. Churubusco was the last. Overwhelmed by the cannons from Boston, we fell after each mortar blast. Most of us died on that hillside in the service of the Mexican state. So far from our occupied homeland, we were heroes and victims of fate. From Dublin City to San Diego, we witnessed freedom denied. So we formed the St. Patrick Battalion and we fought on the Mexican side. From Dublin City to San Diego, we witnessed freedom denied. So we formed the St. Patrick Battalion and we fought on the Mexican side. We formed the St. Patrick Battalion and we fought on the Mexican side.
Howdy, folks. This is David Cobb. I am the Redneck Gone Green, and I am boo-hooing. I knew this was going to happen. I've told David Rovics before, this is my favorite song that he does. Every time I hear it, I cry. I can sing along with it. I know exactly what's coming, and it just fills me with such emotion and pride in knowing, as a descendant of both Scottish and Irish people who fought against that hateful English Empire. And I hate the English Empire, not English people, but the English Empire, because there are so many stories of resistance, so many stories of us coming together and fighting back. And David Rovics tells the story as a musician as well as I've heard anybody do it. This is Redneck Gone Green. I'm your host, David Cobb. I am a redneck, and you bet I've gone green, and I'm trying to convince you to do it too. Remember, this is a weekly podcast where we ask ourselves, what is to be done? This is not a conversation where I try to convince you that it's awful, because fascism is rising. The predatory class are absolutely destroying the planet. Like, I don't think that I'm going to try to convince anybody that that is happening. The question is, what should we do? Every week, we convene together to ask ourselves, what is to be done, specifically looking at people who are doing it and what can we learn from it. That's why I'm so excited to bring David Rovics into this conversation. And before I do, I'm going to play you another song. And in the spirit of critique and self-critique, I'm going to share with you in the 90s, y'all, I don't think, like, I went to a lot of global justice protests, and I don't think I went to a single one where this dude was not playing. If there was music to be had, David Rovics was on that stage, and he was singing, he was getting sing-alongs going, he was chanting. He is a theorist, he is an organizer, he's a musician and a songwriter. But here's the thing. I was in my late 20s, early 30s when I heard the song we're about to hear. It's called Henry Ford Was a Fascist. The first time I heard it, I was like, wait, what? Because I didn't know. Because guess what? I don't know what I don't know, and neither do you. So I want to play this song, and I want you to listen and pay attention to the lyrics, because the first time I heard it, it literally said, wait a minute, is that really true? And it forced me or inspired me to go back and do some research and learn. The point is, David Rovics uses songs to inspire, but also to do political education about what our history has been and what our future could be. Jackrabbit, hit us with Henry Ford Was a Fascist.
Ford built tanks for the Nazis, and the Nazis used those tanks to gun down lots of soldiers in the U.S. Army ranks. Yes, Henry Ford was a fascist, and a nasty one was he. He built tanks for anyone for the proper fee. Henry Ford spoke to his lackeys, and he said, isn't this great? We'll attack our enemies and we'll retaliate. Yes, Henry Ford was a fascist and a cunning liar too. A brown shirt with a swastika draped in red, white, and blue. Henry Ford spoke to his workers and he said, you dare not strike. You must be patriotic and take on my Third Reich. Yes, Henry Ford was a fascist and he had not a care about the dying soldiers that made him a billionaire. Ford built tanks for the Nazis, and he built many more to gun down lots of peasants in Peru and Salvador. Yes, Henry Ford was a fascist, I heard that when he died. The last words to leave his lips was Arbeit macht frei. Yes, the dollar was his icon on whichever shore, and Henry's only motto was make money and make war. Yes, Henry Ford was a fascist. That's all I have to say. I will spit on Henry's rotting grave until my dying day. Yes, Henry Ford was a fascist. That's all I have to say. I will spit on Henry's rotting grave until my dying day.
That was David Rovics. Henry Ford Was a Fascist. And there's the man himself. For those of you who are watching us on YouTube or on Rumble, David Rovics, welcome to Redneck Gone Green.
Thank you, David Cobb. It's so great to see you be on your show. I'm so glad you're doing a show. We need you.
Well, we need you too, and we need more art and music. We need more outrage, but we also need more humor, right? And so I want to bring you into this conversation because, again, like, look, y'all, if you don't know who David Rovics is, then go to davidrovics.org.
.com.
Yeah. .com. Thank you. Here's the thing, y'all. No less than Amy Goodman says David Rovics is the Democracy Now! Of the musical world.
The musical version of Democracy Now! I was so tickled when she gave me that quote. I asked her for a quote, and then she gave me one that was far better than I could have hoped for back in 2001. Yeah.
And it's true. And somebody else said, Rovics, that if Phil Oakes was to return, that they would say, oh, he's the next generation's David Rovics. So like you've made an impression, and you're actually kind of a unicorn because you're making a living as a leftist folk singing artist. Like, that's really hard to do.
It is, actually. I would have to agree. It is hard to make a living at this, and I've actually had to basically reinvent my whole method of making a living multiple times since the 90s in order to continue to make a living, which is why, of course, most artists are not making a living, or if they were, they're not anymore. And it's very much a declining state of affairs for the arts generally, but including the performing arts.
And so let's be clear about this, y'all. What David Rovics is describing is literally how we are morphing from what I would say is late stage capitalism to end stage.
Then we freeze
capitalism.
up again.
And, to me, the thing that's most important and we can hear you, David, and you're still moving. So if it's on your end, we can absolutely hear you, and so can our audience. So if you're able to hear us, we can just keep going. And the important thing to remember, y'all, is that capitalism is always reinventing itself, but we are in late stage capitalism because capitalism itself depends upon extracting the surplus value of the labor of the worker to succeed. And with automation, robotics, new technologies, especially artificial intelligence, what is happening is we're moving into laborless production. The new platforms around the performing arts generally, or specifically, but art in general, is such that only a very small number of people typically are able to succeed as artists. So David Rovics has figured out a way to actually be able to succeed at that, right? And so the point is that David, as a singer-songwriter and a social change agent and a theorist and an organizer, has been able to actually make those adjustments. But again, the fact that we are entering into laborless production should be something that we would be celebrating, right? But the problem is capitalism, because still not the ruling elite, remember, the predatory class of the ruling class, if we democratize this new technology, we would be literally living in paradise right now. But we don't, because a very small number of people have hoarded all the wealth, power, and decision-making authority. And the way they are creating the society has made it virtually impossible for performing artists like David Rovics to be able to make a living. So he's reinvented himself. David, I'm going to see if you've been able to get your technology back, because I've been basically on a leftist rant while we waited to see if you're back with us. Are you able to hear my voice? Well, I'm afraid that we may have lost David. He's going to try to reboot and come back with us. In the meantime, what I want to let folks know is the whole point of this show was to actually get David as not just a singer-songwriter, but also a organizer and theorist, to talk about an essay that he wrote that I thought was incredibly germane. On Redneck Gone Green, one of the things that we really push ourselves to do is to break it down without dumbing it down, to confront the polarization and to find ways to build common ground amongst a shared understanding. And the essay that David Rovics wrote really, in essence, was a compare and a contrast between the Tulsa Massacre and the West Virginia coal mine wars, both of which happened in 1921. So it looks like David is back with us. So David, I've been basically on a rant and then setting you up for the essay that you wrote comparing the Tulsa Massacre with the West Virginia coal mine. So I'm going to turn it over to you to basically give us a thumbnail of what was happening in 1921 and why the compare and contrast to those two movements are so important to us today. Oh, rats. Well, it looks like we're still having trouble on the technical front. It does look like David Rovics is visible to me, and I can actually see him moving around. Jackrabbit is in the stream, but with audio only. What about it, Jackrabbit? What should we do here?
I am going to have to try and check in with David offline. So if you want to just keep talking with our audience, I'll see if I can work something out with David.
You got it. And for those of us who are joining us either on YouTube and or otherwise live, I want to welcome Catherine. Yes, Democracy is Coming is good. That's a Leonard Cohen song. We couldn't play that one because YouTube flagged us and said that we did not own the rights. I do love Leonard Cohen generally, and Democracy is Coming is a beautiful song. And Z Manny says that it was a nice way to enter the video. So thank you so much for that. And I tell you what, y'all, if we don't get David Rovics on soon, we're going to call it and bring him back, because he is such a phenomenal singer, songwriter, and again, organizer and theorist that I want to make sure that we give him an opportunity, because it's really an important bit of analysis that he has for us. So let's wait. If you'll bear with us a moment, we're going to find out if we can get this going. And if not, I'm afraid that we're going to have to just call it. So in the meantime, if anybody wants to make a comment in the chat, please do so. Otherwise, yes, David Rovics has sent me a text, and he says, "This is so suspicious." And it is kind of odd, isn't it, David Rovics, that you and I were chatting it up for a good, 15, 20 minutes before it came, and all was good. And now all of a sudden, it is not. Why the tech problems now, he asks. I ask the same question. And remember, just because I'm paranoid doesn't mean they're not out to get me. And that's actually the truth. And make no mistake about it, we are living in an era where there is no such thing as underground organizing. So, I'm organizing right out in the open. I am a revolutionary trying to restructure society, but I'm doing it in a way that I'm trying very hard to avoid jargon, to avoid dogmatic, like off-putting language, but to just be clear that I think that everybody should be able to have enough food to eat. Everybody should have a decent place to live. Everybody should have access to healthcare and art and culture. Why access to art and culture? Because art and culture is a human need, as surely as food or shelter or clothing. And my position is, if there is a human need, our social contract, we ought to create society in such a way that human needs are collectively met. And that's absolutely possible if we actually had economic democracy. And it's also impossible to do if we have capitalism as the political economy. So we have to actually figure out how to engage ordinary folks into consciousness, into understanding that the predatory class, not the ruling class, remember, or not the elites, right? They're not better than us, but the predatory owning or ruling class have created a society that pits us against each other, arguing over crumbs. And I think that's something pretty darn important. I want to point out that Z-Manny says in the chat, we can still have this conversation about the role of art and culture. It's a very broad topic. I think it's worth carrying on that conversation and then follow up with another video with them. So I can absolutely do that, Z-Manny. So I'd say this. I love to think about the fact that, like, I am not a typical artist or culture worker, although I have come to understand that my talent for telling stories is my particular art form, right? So I guess I'm a storyteller as an artist. But I think it's worth pointing out that part of the reason that I lift up the artist and culture worker in Revolution is because I have studied history. Again, I don't study history to be a good movement Trivial Pursuit player. I study history because I want to win. And my study of history says this: there has never been a single successful revolution that you did not find the principles and values and visions and dreams of the revolution manifested in multiple art forms, in the poetry, in songs, in sculpture, in painting. We can go down the list. So I think it's important to recognize that part of the way you actually have a truly broad social movement on your hand is that the ideas of the social movement begin to replicate themselves in various artistic art forms. And so with that, I think we've got David Rovics back into the conversation. David, are you with us? Well, rats. I can see you, David, but I don't think that you can hear me. So I am so very disappointed about that. But we are going to have you back on. We're going to figure this out. So, what human need are we talking about? Says Z Manny. In my opinion, culture is about growing and circulating thought in a society. This question is also tied with the role of the media industry, which is to manage this. Good point, Z Manny. And like what I would say is this: I think the ability to produce and experience art is the human need, right? And what art is a very good question, because the predatory class work very hard to strip art of anything liberatory. They strip art of anything that is outside of the commodification and glorification of materialism and consumerism. I mean, a perfect example of that is hip hop, right? And I did some organizing with a dear friend, Shamako Noble, the founder of Hip Hop Congress. And we did a series called What the Bleep Happened to Hip Hop? And the answer, what the bleep happened to hip hop? The corporate commodification of what began as a liberatory art form is what happened to hip hop. And I could actually say, oh, and you know what? What the bleep happened to country music? The corporate commodification of what began as hillbilly liberatory music is what happened to country music. So the point is that the overlords, the predatory class, have really perfected the ability to take art and culture, strip it from anything that assists us in consciousness and making genuine connection in a political way, and instead just feeds us back the bling bling and the boom boom and sort of the vacuousness of it all. It's like taking all the nutrition out of food and then just feeding us, sugar and fast food nastiness. So, Z Manny, that's the point. To me, the human need I'm talking about is the need to connect through art, the need to create art, the need to experience art. And the corporate media has done an incredible job of commodifying that and to strip it away. And here, by the way, redneck that I am, 60-year-old redneck, I got a hip hop joke for you. And I made this one up myself. Are y'all ready? Here's the joke. It's a setup. What did they used to call conscious hip hop? Answer? Hip hop. Right? Hip hop always used to be conscious. Like that was literally the whole fucking point of it. And now it is a small subgenre, and most hip hop, bluntly, is pretty misogynistic. It's pretty materialistic and consumeristic, right? But for old hip hop heads, and I am not one of them, right? I came to know this and learn about this. So that's my hip hop joke. David Rovics, I'm going to try one more time. Are you with us now?
I seem to be. I don't know. It was all working fine before the broadcast started.
That was a hell of a thing, wasn't it? So look, let's circle back, man, and bring you into the conversation, because I do want, like, I've been ranting about the corporate commodification of art and culture and how we're shifting from late stage capitalism to end stage capitalism, right? But I want to actually set you up because you're a theorist as well as an organizer and an artist. And I thought your recent essay on Substack was friggin' brilliant. And I'm just going to say, tell us about what was happening in 1921 and the two compare and contrast that you look at to challenge us to think through lessons. So I'm going to turn it over to you.
Sure. Let's see when the whoever's interfering with the broadcast. No, that would be paranoid for me to suspect anything like that. but let's see if they're going to let me talk for a minute. So in 1921, in the space of the same few months, very different events took place in the same country, involving a lot of the same sorts of people, undergoing the same sorts of economic and social and political conditions. But there were notable differences, and the events that took place, two of the most notable events that took place that year were very notably different. And one is an event that we've been hearing about a lot, at least on the 100th anniversary in particular. We were hearing about it a lot on NPR and elsewhere, and the other event that we were not hearing about a lot. But the one event we were hearing a lot about was the terrible racist massacre in Tulsa, Oklahoma, in the Greenwood neighborhood. Killed hundreds and made thousands homeless and destroyed an entire neighborhood. And the one that we don't hear about is the multiracial armed uprising in West Virginia, which was the culmination of the coal mine wars that went down in history as the Battle of Blair Mountain. And that is the thing we don't hear about. But they both happened at the same, in the same country during the same few months. And it's very notable, and it's also notable that in Oklahoma, the political atmosphere of radicalism that had been very much a part of the history of that whole part of the world for a long time was repressed fairly successfully after the Green Corn Rebellion was put down in 1917. And whereas in West Virginia, you had a vibrant union movement, led by the United Mine Workers of America, and which involved really consciously anti-racist and otherwise inclusive union organizing going on throughout the state of West Virginia. And that's where the multiracial armed uprising took place rather than the racist massacre. And I postulate in that essay that this may not be a coincidence, and that it's a good example to take out of history to understand like how people react to different historical circumstances so differently. And of course, if the circumstances that we're living in are even more radically different than the circumstances were between Oklahoma and West Virginia, things can go even more radically different directions. And this essay was basically in response to somebody talking about how we could have dealt with the Reconstruction, how Reconstruction could have gone better, and how denazification in Germany could have gone better. And their suggestion was that we needed to kill more former Confederates and former Nazis. And my suggestion is that we need to create circumstances that don't give rise to fascists being popular in the first place, which means creating a stable, prosperous, well-governed society with lots of unions and cooperatives in it, which are the societies that tend not to be particularly vulnerable to fascist movements becoming popular.
So I'm going to jump in because I think that, to me, like, that is the kernel and the essence, right? Like, how to best defeat fascism. And, I want to be clear, like, if it comes to the punch a Nazi or not, like, I'm a punch a Nazi kind of fellow. Like, we had a world war about that. But that's when they're already Nazis, right? Like, I want to be crystal clear here, y'all. Like, I am convinced, and I'm not usually a binary person, right? I think that things are much more complicated and much more complex. But here is the big picture. Fascism is rising now for the same reason that it rose in the 1930s. Here's my point.
Yes.
In the 1930s, fascism was rising because the entire political economy was being restructured, shifting from an agrarian society to an industrial one. And most ordinary people didn't understand it, like what the hell is happening, but they did know their way of life was being threatened, that they did not see a place for themselves in this world. And the fascists See, fascism is not merely jackbooted thugs and totalitarians, right? Fascism is a political economy based on hyper-nationalism, creating an us and a them, and the us is always nationalistic, and the them are always the other. In this country, it's always white, it's always Christian nationalism, but in Africa, you've got black-skinned Nazis. In Brazil, you've got brown-skinned Nazis. In India, you've got brown-skinned Nazis. So make no mistake about it, it's whoever the us is, that's what fascism is, how to organize the political economy. And the fascist, as horrific as it is, they have an answer. Oh, it's the other that is at fault. And if you will simply, and remember the word fasces comes from Latin, the bound up together, right? So you bound yourself up into the national identity so that you will be strong. And it is a appeal to nationalism. And if you do that, we got you. And there's a place for you. And, you are on the side of good and righteousness, right? So that's how fascism appeals, is to say, oh, there's a place in that for me, right? So it arose in the 30s because society was being reorganized from agrarian to industrial. Friends, today fascism is rising as a genuine political economy because we are literally shifting from an industrial/financial world to a labor-less one with automation, technology, robotics, artificial intelligence. Like, whether I like it or not, whether David Rovics likes it or not, whether Donald Trump likes it or not, literally we're in a revolutionary moment because society is going to be reorganized. Ordinary folks feel it and they're like, well, but like, So what do you think, Rovics? How am I doing so far? Is this how you see
Yeah,
things?
absolutely. Oh, absolutely. But I mean, of course, and the only thing about it is that there are just so many other parallels that can be made between the present and the 1930s. I mean, but the basic, most fundamental parallel is exactly what you're talking about. But of course, what we're the reason why still the kinds of changes that you're talking about are having a much bigger impact in places like the United States, India, and Brazil, rather than, say, Denmark, Sweden, Finland, Cuba. There's. I mean, in the case of the Scandinavian countries specifically, the reason why this is not happening is because they already have societies with really solid. A solid basis that does not involve depending on the market economy for people to be prosperous. I'm deliberately avoiding the term welfare state because these are not welfare states. They are societies. They're social democracies rooted in cooperatives and unions and collective governance through multi-party democracies that actually are democracies the way that they're supposed to be, like where a third party can actually, easily get more and more of the vote and form a governing coalition, all that kind of thing. I mean, it's a whole different model of society than we have. It is not a slight variation on capitalism. It's a totally different model, and it works much better, and it doesn't become, people don't become fascist, which is, I know if there's any Scandinavians listening, some of them are getting kind of squirmy and they're going to want to talk about the Swedish Democrats and how they got 20% of the vote, and that's all true, but it also is not nearly a situation of destabilized situation where there's a serious fascist movement rising that is destabilizing society, and it's not happening there.
So here's the point, y'all. When I say I didn't want to be binary, the big setup, right? So there are a lot of similarities, but here's the thing. I believe that the neoliberal consensus is collapsing before our eyes. This idea that market economics and, quote, well-regulated capitalism is going to somehow give an opportunity for all. I don't think it works. And it's certainly not working in this country or in Brazil or in India, right? So the point is, it is making the toxic seeds of fascism are taking root and growing. And I believe that ultimately we're heading into a condition where people are going to have to, in the words of the great union standard, David Rovics, which side are you on? It's either going to be some version of eco-socialism or some version of fascism. Like, we're going to have a society where we ask, what are our core principles and values, and how do we want to organize that society? And if there is, we're going to share, if we're going to have a basically cooperative society, that's one way to do it. And I think that capitalism is in its like end stage because of the inherent contradictions of capitalism. It can't continue, right? Again, remember, capitalism is actually easy to understand. Private ownership of the means of production. You produce things as commodities, not for just use, but for commodities to be bought and paid for at a profit, profit maximization, and labor itself is just one more commodity. And then you use the market to do the whole thing. That's basically, like, go to any introduction to economics, and that's what you're going to find. That's the basic definition. The problem is, if you understand it, the ideology of the cancer cell, right? Like on a finite planet, capitalism, especially as industrial and technology is exacerbating and getting better and better at commodification, we're literally destroying Mother Earth faster than she can replenish herself, right? So we are going to have to come to terms with that existential crisis. That's the ecological limits. But friends, even if there was some technological fix, which I do not believe is possible, but even if there was some magic, right? I'm telling you that capitalism itself is coming to the end because the capitalist can no longer extract the surplus value of the labor of the worker because the worker is becoming less and less necessary, right? So this is why I'm saying we have to embrace a cooperative society where our whole job is to take care of each other and to regenerate the earth. And what I would say is, this is basically the indigenous worldview. We have to remember what all of our ancestors once knew, and that is, we're supposed to be in right relationship with each other, ourselves, and the natural world. It's not property to be commodified and exploited. It is a symbiotic relationship of life.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with every every word. And
so, David,
and that, that's
point.
what we need, huh? But
yes.
of course, we're not going to get there. I mean, the point that I'm often making in these essays and many other contexts is, we're not going to achieve eco-socialism or any other kind of socialism just by opposing fascism. And in fact, just opposing fascism is actually one of the best ways to help the fascists out. And history has demonstrated this over the past century, and very eloquently. And I think it's pretty hard to argue with that point in my reading of history. So we desperately need to actually organize socialism, and we need to stop thinking that further polarization or becoming more rabidly anti-fascist or pro banning people off of platforms and making sure they don't get on TV or whatever it is that people think is progressive these days. This is not the way forward. Censorship and attacking free speech and deplatforming people and cancellation campaigning. None of that is, whether you're directing it at other leftists or at right wingers, none of it is useful. All of it has been proven over the past century to be totally counterproductive. We need to build socialism. We don't need to polarize and argue and pretend to be good anti-fascists, taking positions online and, shouting on Facebook and Twitter. It's totally useless.
I like
Worse
Z
than
Manny
useless.
is a frequent listener and commenter. Z Manny writes, I think people have a deep need for connection and meaning in their lives. In my opinion, culture is our process tied with this. Maybe the fascists are starved of this meaning and erupts through violence. What do you think, Rovics?
I think that generally one of the things that attracts anybody to any kind of radical solutions to terrible problems is groups will form cultures that attract people to them, and this has been done forever by anybody calling themselves socialists, communists, anarchists, and also fascist. Fascists don't lack culture; they have their own culture, and or they, take over other people's culture. Whatever, it doesn't matter. They have what they call culture and what other people identify as culture. Whether it's the folk process or theft or whatever it is, it doesn't really matter, because it's something that attracts people when there's culture, and that's why the National Socialists were very in Germany in the 30s were very into culture and religion and mythology and history and all that stuff, because it attracts people, and it's interesting, and it helps foster community, and everybody should know that about the fascists in the 30s. I mean, they had summer camps. They believed in exercise and having a good diet and teaching children how to do things like shoot and play outside in all sorts of different forms. People got tan and grew tall and ate good food, and this was all fascist, part of the fascist ideology. It's not unique to socialism to have summer camps and to sing songs together and bond and all that stuff. It's just the kind of thing that anybody does who's trying to organize a movement. We need to realize that. These are not defective people who just can't function or something. They have a lot going on, culturally. And this has always been the case. We're not dealing with two-dimensional people here. There aren't any.
Folks, you're listening and or watching Redneck Gone Green. I'm your host, David Cobb. I am the Redneck, and yes, I've gone green, and I'm trying to convince you to do it as well. But I want to be clear. I engage electoral politics, but I ain't no electoral fetishist, right? I understand elections to be a tactic, and if it's part of a strategy for liberation, I'm all about it. But I also know the importance of art and culture in movement work. I know the importance of building alternatives to meet people's needs, like public banking and participatory budgeting and community land trust and worker-owned cooperatives. Like, the point is here on this program, we're asking ourselves what is to be done. And in this particular conversation, we're speaking with David Rovics. David Rovics is a singer, a songwriter, a theorist, an organizer, and a podcaster. You can read his stuff on Substack over at, what's the Substack called, David?
Oh, yeah, good question. What is it? Now, I can't remember. Is it davidrovics.substack or Substack? It's This Week with David Rovics, anyway. You can
This Week with David Rovics, and he's got a phenomenal website. He writes, he puts together a podcast, he does video, there's music there. I mean, like, the point is, David Rovics is one of those rare individuals who does art well, does storytelling well, organizes actual human beings to come together, and does strategery well. And so the point that I'm making is I want to have David on to ask ourselves, how do we build that world that makes it impossible for the seeds of fascism to really take root? And your short answer is?
I mean, my short answer is we have I would say the key in a sentence is a prosperous society with competent governance that is characterized by a domination of society by cooperatives and unions. I mean, that from my observation, those are the most stable, happy societies, the egalitarian ones. And those are also the most, the ones where they raise their kids the best, and the ones where they don't have a big problem with fascism or a lot of other things that we have in this society. But
and what's interesting to me, David, is when like when you did In a Nutshell, when I sort of challenged you, give it to us in the skinny. When you did it as a storyteller, I can take that message into any pool hall or bowling alley in the rural South. Hell, I could go anywhere in this country where white folks gather together. And I do think we have to recognize, how critical it is that you look like the people that are strangers to you. That's reality. But I can take that message and I can have that conversation. And I don't care if people think they're more or less a Trump supporter, more or less a Bernie Sanders supporter, more or less a Biden supporter, more or less a Cornel West supporter. Like, I can take that basic message of, shouldn't we be cooperating? Shouldn't we have a prosperous society? Shouldn't we make sure that our children have a future? That's a winning message.
It is so true, and it is exactly. I mean, it's exactly what I keep on telling people, and it's exactly why we don't need all this polarization. And a lot of people are afraid that they don't want to try to even understand why is it that most of the people that when polls were taken at the time that Bernie Sanders was a candidate, that most people said that if it were a race between him and Trump, they'd vote for him. How is it that the same people, so many of the same people who voted for Trump, also voted for Bernie Sanders? That's a fact. And how is that the case? Why is that the case? Why is there such crossover here? And I think it's obvious to anybody who understands once again the history of fascism. And I'm by no means saying that everybody who voted for Trump is fascist. That's not at all the point I'm making. But the point is that they both talked about the working class, and they were the only two candidates who did that. When we're talking about electoral politics in 2016, who was talking about the working class? There were two of them: Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump. Nobody else.
And isn't it crazy that Donald Trump and the Republican nominee and the Republican Party was doing a better job of messaging to the working class than the neoliberal Democrats, whether it's Hillary Clinton or Joe Biden or any of the rest of them? That's something that I don't believe that they are sincere, but their messaging around the aspirations and the genuine concerns and fears of the working class. Donald Trump has better messaging than Joe Biden and the neoliberals.
Absolutely. And I mean, it is amazing because it's so sad, because we could potentially, you would think, have people much more capable of good messaging who are coming from a left orientation. But the Democratic Party hasn't been coming from any kind of any semblance of a left orientation for at least my entire lifetime. I mean, it's at least since like when I was like 6 years old was probably the last time the Democrats, you could call that group, that party, a sort of politically or economically, had progressive aspects to it, supporting the idea of organized labor and housing for everybody and that kind of thing. It hasn't supported those things for 50 years in any kind of consistent way. And now it's in the past 10 years or so, it really has become like this kind of switch where, both parties of the ruling class are repositioning themselves, and the Democrats are like the party of intersectionality and imperialism and capitalism, and the Republicans are the party of white people and capitalism and imperialism. So we have these slight differences, and they were slightly different in the opposite ways a century ago. When the Democrats billed themselves as the party of the white man. I mean, if you look at you look at official party propaganda from 1916. It was a caricature of a black man and a, sort of opposite kind of caricature of a handsome white man, and it said underneath, vote for the party of the white man, which was the Democrats.
I thank you, David, and I really appreciate Catherine's comment. Who she writes in to say, we simply need to be more attractive than any other policy. And it does remind me that as an organizer, one of the axioms that I know to be true is throw a better party, right? Like,
totally.
I mean, like if you make your movement fun and sexy and inspirational, and you play together, like people will join. You know what people don't join? People don't join internecine squabbles. People don't join shrill, angry folk. Like it's not how it works. So, I really appreciate Catherine's point and your point
It's
as
a
well,
great
David
point.
Rovics, and that is we need to speak to ordinary people in language that they understand about how their life could be better.
Totally. And we need to have a lot more parties, and we need to play music, and we need to hang out together and dance together and do things together. I mean, we need physical community. We need to gather in physical spaces. That's why that actual real organizing in the real world in physical spaces is so important, which is why the atomization of society with the suburbanization of the society and the vast gentrification, how expensive housing is, how people have to move further and further away from each other in order to survive. All this is, driving around in private cars, not seeing each other in so many ways. It's just the loneliness. It's all exactly the opposite of what we need. What we need is to throw a better party, have more fun, have better music, have and do things together. This is how you organize people. You got to have events, and of course, as a storyteller, performer, singer. As you say, my thing is popular education, but it's doing it in a fun way. You hear a song and before you know it, you've learned something, but you didn't. But it was painless, and you had fun while learning something. That's the power of music and other forms of the arts. I mean, a good speech can be fun too, but it can often get a bit boring, and it's nice to get your education and your in other forms as well.
So Z Manny, who frequently comments and writes, says, what is it that we want and need from our culture and media in a society? What would that look like in a healthy society? Thinking of its true function helps us to think how to fix this process. And I think that's an incredibly insightful comment and series of questions.
It's very important. It's also the subject of my latest essay, which is the social engineering and paralysis of the U.S. left, and the social engineering aspect of what the media is doing. I mean, which is so fascinating. And of course, this is all stuff that we might have learned from Noam Chomsky, and he probably got it from somewhere else. But the manufacturing consent, if people haven't read that classic. But the phenomenon is, one of the things that's so fascinating about it is that you can be an earnest, well-meaning, usually young reporter and do your best at covering the stories that you get to cover and do your best at doing a good job at it. And you can still be playing a game set out by the powers that be to polarize society, all at the same time. And this is the brilliance of the polarizers. And I think a good example of this is currently, and has been for 40 years, National Public Radio, PBS. And I can tell you stories about how they've been doing this for 40 years. But just in terms of like my lifetime, which is actually about 40 years of listening to them, what they do is systematic, and it is a systematic playing down or almost completely ignoring class conflict in society, or the labor movement, or the history of the labor movement, and playing up racial and gender and sexual orientation, and all of which are forms of division and forms of oppression and exploitation that are profoundly important to be doing these stories on, which is part of the brilliance of the way they polarize people, because they can have really well-meaning and actually competent reporters doing important stories about police brutality and about all sorts of different aspects of how race, gender, and sexual orientation affect people's lives and are so important to be reporting on. But while they, through no fault of their own, are totally ignoring class and capitalism and imperialism, then they're totally avoiding the biggest elephants in the living room. There is, no matter, if we were talking about numbers here, if we're talking about numbers, there is no division in society that even comes close to the class divide. 1% of this population of this country owns more than half the wealth. There is no way you can take any other demographic difference between people and say that there is anything close to this kind of divide. Class, we are a capitalist society, and class is at the very heart of the division in this society. And as long as that is not a central to media coverage, then they are doing social engineering. They are ignoring the elephant in the living room and trying to pretend that it's not there, and trying to pretend that this is a society based on racial division, which it is. Race has been used as a divisive tool and as a form of exploitation, massive profit for centuries in this society. But this is a capitalist society using race as a form of division and using particular racialized groups as a form of super exploitation and profit. But it is a capitalist society fundamentally. And this class divide is so fundamental. And if they're going to ignore it, that's going to have a massive impact, and that is going to cause so many people to leave the ranks, not just white people, but so many others to leave the ranks of the Democratic Party and join the Republican Party, which is, of course, like jumping from the fire into the frying pan or vice versa. It doesn't, whichever. But this is what's happening for sure. And it's because they're denying and ignoring the elephant in the living room, which is the class divide, which is just constantly getting worse. And everybody can see it. I mean, it's obvious, You look around this city, look around your city. It's just people living on the streets, people living in vehicles. It is just more like 1929 than ever.
Folks, you're listening to Redneck Gone Green. I'm your host, David Cobb. We're speaking to David Rovics, singer, songwriter, theorist, strategist, all-around good human being, trying to help us find a way to build the cooperative, loving, peaceful society. I want to ask you to please like, share, and subscribe to this channel to help us grow our community. We know that the corporate algorithms are used to suppress us, but we're still finding and building a community. I'm very happy to tell you we're up to 4,000 people and growing on Substack. If you haven't joined our YouTube channel, please do that. Or if it's just too censored over at YouTube for you, go over to Rumble. We're there too. We're gonna get on as many platforms as we can, David Rovics, because we think that ordinary folks need to come together and strategize and have these kinds of conversations. And I do want to underscore, to me, the powerful observation that there is still a consensus between Republicans and Democrats on capitalism as the way to organize the political economy, and imperialism as the way to conduct U.S. foreign policy. There is absolutely a difference between Democrats and Republicans on issues of bodily integrity and issues of race and gender. There are differences, and those differences matter. And it's equally true that there is an 100% consensus on capitalism, imperialism. So to me, the challenge is, how do we do a true intersectional approach that says we're going to confront the reality of white supremacy, heteropatriarchy, settler colonialism, and capitalism as all power over dominator systems and find our way to it? It's why I always remind people, I occupy a male body. I spent my, I've had this body my whole life. I've been profoundly privileged by the incredible toxic way that gender is done in this country. And I still remember the first time I read Understanding Patriarchy by Bell Hooks. And her first sentence is, patriarchy is the most damaging institution in the planet, in the United States today, and it is harming men. And it blew my fucking mind, because I had always understood, patriarchy to be a very specific thing, which it is, but there is a way to understand that patriarchy actually demands it privileges a male, but at the same time, it comes at a heavy toll, my humanity. I have to suppress my own emotions and my feelings. It is it's a bad deal. It looks like a good deal because you get power and you get privilege and you get all this stuff. But what you find out, just as Ken does in the Barbie movie, you find out what you actually have to pay for it. Same thing is true with white supremacy, y'all. White supremacy is real. White privilege is real. But I'll tell you, it comes at a very heavy toll. That's why we have to learn to have these conversations to go beyond what we're at and lean into the liberatory framework that we need. I'm so sorry to say that we've lost David Rovics again. So we are at the end of the hour. So we're going to call this show. I promise you we'll bring David Rovics back and we'll have a less convoluted conversation. I do want to thank you, the viewer, listener. Remember, if you're listening to this podcast, forward it along. If you're watching us on YouTube, forward it along. Subscribe to us on YouTube. Subscribe to us on Rumble. Go to our Substack. Remember, we're getting larger, stronger, and better organized every week. And we want you to join us to be part of the peaceful, loving, just, democratic world that we so richly deserves and so desperately need. Peace.